Is the United States on the cusp of war with Venezuela? It sure seems like that might be the case as Donald Trump ratchets up the pressure on Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro to resign and go into exile. Plus, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth denies giving an order to fire a second missile to kill survivors of an initial attack on a boat supposedly carrying drugs to the U.S. But members of Congress want to investigate after a story in the Washington Post said Hegseth did give that order. Is such an order, if it were given, legal under the laws of war?
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome to Potomac Watch, the daily podcast of Wall Street Journal Opinion. I'm Paul Gigot, here with my colleagues Kate Batchelder Odell and William McGurn. Let's discuss Venezuela first. Not getting as much attention as Ukraine and Russia, but big story with enormous stakes for the United States. The Miami Herald reporting that Donald Trump gave an ultimatum to Maduro in a phone call, said, get out if you want to protect your life and your family, and do it soon. On the weekend, Donald Trump also announced that he was effectively closing Venezuelan airspace, saying commercial traffic should stay away. He has an enormous naval flotilla assembled in the Caribbean with a great number of warships, some F-35s, jet fighters on Puerto Rico, thousands of Marines. That all can't be there just for running drugs, Kate. I suppose it could be, but it's certainly overkill if it is. What do you make of all of this maneuvering? What do you think's going on, Kate?
Well, there's been a flurry of activity over the past day or so. We know that there's some discussions inside the Trump administration about its next steps in the Caribbean. And we know that the president talked to Maduro, though it isn't yet clear exactly what transpired in that phone call. But I mean, this is, for weeks, it's been something of a real mystery of what the Trump administration's goal in the Caribbean is. Because to your point, about 25% of the U.S. Navy's deployed fleet is in that area. That is simply not a type of force you would use if you were merely there to do some intimidation and sink some drug boats. It is a force that resembles much more closely, the U.S. action in Panama in 1989. And so this is just a really large naval buildup there. And so I think to that point, the Trump is at a bit of an inflection point where he may not be able to just simply intimidate Maduro to leave the country and give up power without the U.S. having to act. And then if Trump just simply withdraws this naval force and only fires a tomahawk of displeasure, it will be a major step down of U.S. credibility. So I think this is really an inflection point of whether the Trump administration is serious about pushing out Maduro by force if required.
All of my reporting and from what we're watching, it suggests to me that Trump has essentially made a calculation. And that calculation is, look, it's in the U.S. interest to get rid of Maduro. Tried to do it in the first term. Ultimately didn't succeed. This is when they supported Juan Guaido, opposition leader in the assembly. Then in 2024, there was an election in Venezuela, and the opposition won, by all honest account, an enormous victory. And international observers said so. Maduro refused to leave power, so he is holding on to power in an illegitimate way. Trump has said, okay, with all of that backdrop, if I ratchet up the pressure gradually, send in the warships, close down the airspace, saber rattle, maybe Bill, he thinks he can get Maduro to leave without having to fire a shot. And so far, Maduro is calling that bluff and saying, well, I'm not leaving. Now, he's clearly nervous. He's, sometimes saying, we must have peace. We must have peace. On the other hand, he's mobilizing his military, such as it is, to defend Venezuela if need be. So I agree with Kate that what you have here is a real moment where Trump is if Maduro doesn't leave, what is Trump going to do? Is he going to actually send troops in? Is he going to target not just Maduro himself, but his not just drug manufacturing plants, but also the military?
Yeah, I read Trump actually more or less the same way you do. He's always been reluctant to intervene. Not that he won't intervene and won't intervene decisively, as we saw with Israel and so forth, but he wants to be sure it's short term. I don't think Trump ever wants to intervene when he thinks it's going to be more than a month or something. He wants to be in and out. And it's not a really bad instinct, to wonder about getting stuck longer than you thought. But that said, the problem with the approach he's taking now, we've tried to ease Maduro out so many times before. These guys, when it comes to their own power, are very resilient because they don't have to build a country. They just have to survive.
Right.
And all the people who are with them have the same problem, right? They don't all have escape. So the incentive is for Maduro to stay and defy Trump. And I agree it's going to come to a head. It's why I think when you do want someone out and decide it's in the interest of the United States that someone be removed, you do it quickly and decisively. That always means less blood in the long run, and it's far more clear, and you don't leave a tangled mess. I think it's unclear to most Americans what's going on, right? When I was in the Bush White House, whatever he did in Iraq, and a lot of it wasn't popular, but he went on TV and explained it to people. This is when I don't think Donald Trump has given one foreign policy speech just to explain what are we doing in these places. And I think it would help him if he did. It forces a clarity. You have to articulate your policy and defend it.
Well, yeah, explanation is not Donald Trump's strong suit. He's given some Truth Social media posts about the drug runners allegedly carrying fentanyl to the United States, and to the extent that he's made any justification for the military actions taken so far, Kate, it's really been for the fentanyl and stopping drugs. He hasn't actually laid out a case that said, here are the American people, deposing Maduro is in the U.S. national interest. And by the way, here's the humanitarian and moral case for it. He has not done that. Will he? I don't know. But if he doesn't do it, then any military action he's going to take, especially if it goes on the ground in Venezuela, will have to be successful, because he's not going to have a lot of people who are going to back him if it runs into trouble.
I think it would be a big improvement if the president would make the case for what he's doing in Venezuela and what he hopes to get out of it. And I think the U.S. interest in deposing Maduro is significant, not just for a freer and safer Western Hemisphere, but also because of Maduro's backers in Russia. It also would advance in Iran. It would also advance U.S. interests in other regions of the world, and possibly produce a possibility of change in Cuba. So I think the stakes are larger than Venezuela, and the public is open to hearing that argument from the president if he were to make it. I also think Donald Trump seems to think about the Western Hemisphere differently than he does other parts of the world. And so that gives me some opening to think that he is actually serious about imposing a change of regime here by using military action. There are risks to any military action that he would have to explain to the public, but I also think there are real possibilities here that are much different from prior U.S. interventions in other parts of the world. I mean, Venezuela has a functioning opposition. It has much stronger civic foundations than before Maduro destroyed the country. So I do think if the president were to explain why this is in the U.S. interest and what he hopes to accomplish, that there would be public support for it, and that it would, like his Iran strike, really redound to other regions of the world. But at the same time, he's very reluctant to accept that risk. I mean, the Iran strike was his finest hour, but the Israelis had taken out the air defenses. It was a different show than what we're talking about here.
Very much so. 2 points regarding the Iran strike. First, remember, it was essentially firing some missiles from stealth bombers. Okay. So in and out, boom, over, battle damage assessment. The Iranian nuclear facilities crippled, at least for the time being. Okay. No American troops on the ground, and done and dusted. Here, there's greater risk in Venezuela if Maduro doesn't leave and the military, his military backers, decide not to break and go for the opposition. Now, there's been a lot of talk among the Venezuelan oppositions. Maria Corina Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize recently, has said some of the military will break for the opposition. The problem is that Cuban intelligence is working very closely with the Maduro's military intelligence, and anybody in the military, any officers, any officer group that decides to break with them risks their lives, and so that's not going to be as easy to pull off here, perhaps. Now, one hopes, Bill, that the CIA is, I wish it were as good as the Mossad, the Israeli Mossad. I don't think it is. At least the track record isn't good. But you hope to think that that has some sources on the ground who know just what the byplay is in the military and whether or not you can get those guns on your side if it comes to guns. Now, Trump really wants Maduro to leave without firing a shot. And I think that would be a big victory for Trump if he could pull that off. And then they could install the government that was elected in 2024. But the question is Trump willing to take the risk if Maduro doesn't leave? I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't think Maduro knows. I'm not sure Trump knows yet what he's going to do. He tends to react at the time. I think he laid out the problems. One thing that's interesting to me, first of all, on attacks that are easy or not easy, all attacks I think are difficult. I served in a wartime White House. Nothing's easy because things can go wrong. Mm. And when they go wrong, good Americans die, like the soldiers and stuff. That doesn't mean you don't do them. You take the risk, but just it always has, when you're holding the ball and you got the blame, you're conscious that even in the best planned attack, things can go very wrong and have real tragedies. So, and just compare Trump with Biden, would never do the kind of attack we saw. That said, what's interesting too, that's kind of missing from all this is that we discuss, and a lot of people discuss, Venezuela now, what's going to happen, but we discuss in isolation. Like we can isolate this from Russia and Ukraine, from the Middle East. The bad guys of the world all look at what you do for clues to what you're going to do.
Right.
So you mentioned Trump's credibility. His kind of credibility for other negotiations that he's in is also in line. It's just not just a matter of what we do in Venezuela. How does that affect calculations in other conflicts? And that's why it's kind of amazing to me that Trump has opened the door to this clash with Venezuela at a time when we have hotspots, in Ukraine and the Middle East and so forth. We don't want to overextend. And I'm just surprised Trump is making an issue of this now. I haven't seen the intelligence that he's seen, what has caused him to kind of come back to this after and really elevate it so long. And I think going back to the first point, what we need is really strong address to the American people, laying out clearly what he's doing and why, and asking for the people for their support.
Trump doesn't like to commit himself to operations that aren't foreseeable as a pretty easy win. So I think you have to figure that into his calculation. But if he does get Maduro to leave on his own, just by the threats that he's marshaled, that would be a victory. All right, let's turn to Pete Hegseth, another story that broke over the weekend. That's the Secretary of Defense. And the Washington Post reported that he gave an order for a second missile to be fired at the survivors of an initial missile attack on a boat that was attacked because it allegedly had been running drugs. This is raising questions about whether or not this was legal or violated the laws of war. Let's listen to Mike Turner. He's an Ohio Republican who used to run the House Intelligence Committee.
Congress does not have information that had occurred. Both the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and ranking members have opened investigations. Obviously, if that occurred, that would be very serious. And I agree that would be an illegal act. That is not the legal opinion or the information or the legal justification, the acts that have been described to Congress that are being undertaken in this. There are very serious concerns in Congress about the attacks on the so-called drug boats down in the Caribbean and the Pacific, and the legal justification has been provided. But this is completely outside of anything that has been discussed with Congress, and there is an ongoing investigation.
Well, serious stuff. Mike Turner, Republican, serious guy, raising the possibility, if this in fact turns out to have happened, as a possible war crime. Now, Donald Trump said that the Secretary of Defense told him that he did not, in fact, give such an order. And Trump said he believed the secretary, and Trump said he would not have wanted such an order to be issued if in fact it was. But there's real concern, Kate, in Congress about this, and Roger Wicker, Senate Armed Services Committee chairman, and others saying that they really do want to get to the bottom of this. So I assume before too long, Pete Hegseth will be up before Congress explaining what happened under oath.
I think Congress here is doing a public service by actually trying to get ground truth to the public on what actually happened. And I thought, Don Bacon, the Republican in the House, who's also on armed services, said, let's get some facts on this story first, because I think there is reason to wonder what happened here. I mean, the Pentagon has said it's false, it's inflammatory. They're just denouncing the story and saying we'll just ride this out. The president denied it. And if that's true, that the story has the wrong bent, then there will be a long factual record to support Secretary Hegseth. I mean, one reason I am cautious about this story is just that there are many layers of bureaucracy between the Secretary of Defense in executing a military strike. There are many judge advocate generals who review these types of orders. There's, we're talking about the head of Special Operations Command, not a Trump toady. You also have Southern Command. This is in their area of operations. It seems hard for me to imagine that a single civilian could stress test this system without a factual record from some of these individuals about what directions they received and what they did with that information, if for no other reason to protect themselves in the event they were asked to do something that was inappropriate. So there will be a factual record here that can settle this dispute. And the question really is, why doesn't the Trump administration want to get that out and make those facts clear, as opposed to just denouncing their way through it?
Well, and we do know, Bill, that there's no shortage of people in the Pentagon bureaucracy who would like to see Pete Hegseth out of a job. So he has enemies inside the bureaucracy, and some of them may have leaked to the Washington Post. Firsthand, secondhand, we don't know the provenance of the story. On the other hand, if you're the Post and you're going with a very serious accusation, so you would think that they would have at least some real assurance that they got this right. But I want to read to you Section 547 of the DoD Law of War Manual, which says, prohibition against declaring that no quarter be given. It is forbidden to declare that no quarter will be given. This means that it is prohibited to order that legitimate offers of surrender will be refused, or that detainees, such as unprivileged belligerents, will be summarily executed. Moreover, it is also prohibited to conduct hostilities on the basis that there shall be no survivors. And it goes on. That suggests that, in fact, if there were if our surveillance showed that there were a couple of survivors on that boat, it would be wrong and a violation of this DOD law of the war manual to send in another missile strike to kill them.
Yeah, I mean, I know nothing about what's at dispute, the factual things that happen. It's clear that if you just fired on two unarmed people who are no threat and intending to kill them, who survived, that would be wrong. But we don't know any of the facts, and I think Kate's right. There's so many things we don't know. Like, it'd be okay to, I think, to attack the ship if they thought in some way it still poses a threat. Again, I don't know what it is, but there's serious questions about truthfulness here. Who's telling the truth? And merely citing a statute of the law, what we're forbidden or not forbidden to do, I don't think tells us much until we have facts. And once we have facts, we can, and someone's clearly lying, or fudging, created misimpression by this. So until we get the facts, I don't think we'll know. And I know that when facts come out, it really changes the color. Like, a little change can really mean a big change in how you perceive what happened, if you know something factual there. So I'm reluctant to weigh in on the merits of the case. There are serious issues. There are serious people looking at the issues. And one hopes it's done with honesty and good faith.
Kate, how do you think that this will proceed? Basically, with these congressional committees looking at this and then trying to lay down a factual record and then making judgments about it.
Well, I think Congress has identified here that there's much more at stake than even this particular case, because these kinds of this awful excess of if we were shooting wounded survivors will really corrode the public's support for the president making liberal use of his Article 2 powers. And it really does get into a broader problem, that we were previously discussing, but even on the narrow question of what legal rationale is being used for some of these drug boat strikes, Congress has been trying to get more definitive answers to that question and has struggled to do so. So there's more at stake here than just President Trump and his actions. It's really about separation of powers and how a president can conduct foreign policy. So I think getting a record there is important. I want to add one other tertiary point, but there's been a debate in the U.S. military about rules of engagement and the belief that in the war on terror, the U.S. was too strict about its rules of engagement in a way that forced U.S. troops to fight one hand behind its back, and that the U.S. needed to produce lawyers who could balance collateral damage with the need to accomplish the mission and end hostilities, which ultimately is what protects civilian or casual collateral damage lives. And I mention all that because that's an important conversation as the U.S. starts to face different types of stronger military competitors. We need sound legal advice that considers that whole picture. And there's no public support for this blatant violation of DoD directives. And so it's really going to corrode that broader conversation about how the U.S. uses force responsibly and within its interests. And so I think it's you're right to ground it too in the Pentagon and the U.S.'s own interpretation of the laws of warfare, which any junior commander would be held accountable for had he erred from it.
All right, that's going to be the last word on Pete Hegseth for today, but not, I'm sure, for the coming weeks and months. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Bill. Thank you all for listening. We are here every day on Potomac Watch.